Hi, everyone, and welcome back. And it was a little long for the last one. And this is the last class, the number 10 week. And we'll continue from where we stopped last week version. Okay. And we were discussing the part number 3, which deals with the paradigms of regarding Christian upbringing. And there are several elements or the paradigms that we need to consider as we plan and execute our Christian education for our students, our disciples, and our children. And we have discussed until the religious versus non-religious. Let's go on to the family and home. The culture within the family and the home. Each family has specific culture, the family culture. Sometimes certain family more emphasize the academic achievement, while some family is rather focused on their personal character, the growth of maturity of personal character. So that's kind of cultural context that we are seeing at. And my preference is for the family to abide by the biblical principles, creating this culture. And but you do not have control over someone else's family when you are, teaching as a pastor or the Bible teacher or Christian leader in an institution. But the thing is, you need to be aware of what kind of the family culture that the particular person has grown up. And to know that, you need to have this conversation with the intention to get to know those backgrounds. That's a very key part of the caring portion of Christian education. So if you are to care someone as a Christian leader and the teacher, that it is necessary to know the culture of family that he or she has grown up. And then friends also create or cultivate a culture for a person. So that's also important in the same sense. And the neighborhood as well. Okay. The next paradigm that creating the reality for a Christian education would be the emphasis and focus of the spiritual context. When we are trying to do the Christian education, basically we are creating or cultivating a spirituality spirituality is a whole person or whole dynamic. And each spiritual institutions, church or school or home, you have certain focus and direction and emphasis. And you should, as an institution and as a teacher, individual teacher or pastor, you need to, it's not need to, whether you are aware of it or not, you do have certain emphasis and focus. But within the emphasis and focus and priorities, you also need to balance. Balance. Balance does not mean that you do not have a focus, but balance means giving an appropriate weight or intensity or the emphasis. And it is your discernment. You have to discern whether this is something that you need to give a emphasis or not. So the spirituality of your disciple and your students are going to be determined, or at least going to be influenced who you are. Your focus and emphasis of spirituality is going to have some effects on your students, whether you intend it or not. So that means you need to have proper emphasis and focus, and sometimes it's just a matter of choice, or and a matter of favor, rather than some justification. For example, this is one example of your emphasis or focus or inclination. You can be you may have fundamental spirituality or evangelical spirituality. Both are acceptable. Acceptable means you cannot discuss which one is better than the other. I personally believe evangelical spirituality is more of biblical and thus better. But fundamentalist, or some say is conservative Christian. I mean, they believe fundamental Christianity, which emphasizes not only the biblical teachings but church traditions. Tradition is a part of the truth. They consider as doctrine as much important as a doctrine. So doctrine and the tradition becomes at the same level. But for evangelicals, doctrine does evolve and develop and change and need to be reformed when it comes to the point the Bible says otherwise. And the tradition, of course, more. When the doctrine is something that needs to be validated continually, for evangelicals, the tradition is just a tradition. It can be changed whenever. The culture changes, the society changes, and then church becomes in a different fashion, so to speak. For example, some fundamentalists do not allow the guitar to be played in a sanctuary or in their formal worship. Otherwise, many evangelicals are contemporary, at least regarding the music, and then some other means like a media. They use projectors and the loud music and speaker system, and then all different forms and styles of music into the church. So you cannot say which one is better or right or wrong. It's a matter of choice. So these are the so-called colors of spirituality, which is a very important part of Christian paradigm. And that Christian paradigm, it translates right into the educational paradigm. So that's the reason that we are discussing these things. And also that there is something called a denomination. Each denomination has some somewhat different degree of doctrines, or different interpretation of doctrines, and sometimes different rituals and different application of certain doctrine. For example, some does baptism with the immersion, meaning you put a person under the water and bring that person up for the baptism. Some baptism just sprinkles water on a forehead and that's done and enough. And which forms of baptism do you accept? It's totally denominational. Some say that the emergence or underwater kind of baptism is more biblical. Now, I'm a Baptist myself, and but I wouldn't say that is more biblical or better. It depends on. So that there's some denominational thing, and if your church and your school belongs a certain denomination, and you are required to instruct and teach according to your denominational doctrine and policy, and then the practice. So it is okay, and there's nothing to argue about. If you don't like that kind of denominational policy and doctrine, then you move to another one that you like. So it's a matter of choice again. But the thing is, you cannot force your student and then your disciple and your children to become or to be a member of such certain denominational doctrine or practice. I mean, it's their choice. They have freedom and the right to choose, which is biblical. And then, Pastoral, let's go on with the next topic. People context. These elements create or construct very key paradigms. So as you look at the education, try to analyze your system, your church, your school, Christian school, then you need to look at these elements to improve or to even sometimes build structure a paradigm or paradigms for your education. And then there are like parents, friends, community, and the backgrounds of people. So you look at a student and disciple and parents, even though many times or sometimes the parents are not visible physically, not present, they will have very great influence on the education. Your disciple, your student are told A at the church and goes back to to their home, which sometimes have non-believing, non-Christian parents, and they tell C instead of A that were taught, then that creates some problem and issue and confusion to the child or the disciple. So for that reason and many other reasons, the parents becomes a very key component in constructing the educational paradigm. And the friends, what kind of friends that your disciple and your children and child have regarding this Christian education, it may become a very critical factor in the paradigm part on doing a Christian education. There's something called so-called peer pressure, and that pressure can be used in either good sense or bad sense. But regardless whether it's good or bad, I could say the peer pressure or the influence of friends are much greater than the influence of parents or teachers or pastor. So your job, if you could, as a Christian leader and pastor and teacher, if you could, and if it's not against your conscience or the regulation, then it is good for you to help your students to create a good friendship circle among the believers. That does not mean that you count out non-believers. Believers and non-believers included. You need to, see the characters of the personality and the value of those friends that your student or disciple is associating with, and then give some advice and direction and mentoring over the decisions of them to make a good circle of friends, and emphasize on the importance of the friends in upbringing of these students and disciples. So out of these, the friends community and parents, friends has the most influence over pastor and the parents and the teachers. The community that I'm talking about is the Christian community. It's a church. It could be a church, and it could be an institution, whatever. So the community, the people in that community also exercise and does have that influence over the education. The background is like a backdrop in the movie, not background of a person. It's more like a background that creating the people environment, such as the educational level, the strength of spirituality of the people surrounding them, and then color of the spirituality, and these things are the backgrounds. Community and church, we talked about this. Country and society at large. We have discussed this in the culture already, but then sometimes the national religion. Say, if you are growing up in a Islamic community and the nation, and if you are a Christian, then you're going to have a very difficult time to grow as a Christian. And then Christian education, the opportunity and the facility and the resources are very limited. So those kind of things create the environment, ecology, and thus the paradigm. Social norm, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in a given society, is also key to building and planning and creating your educational system as a Christian. Expectations. That plays a very great role in a culture like ours, like in the Asian culture, Korean culture, and Chinese and Koreans, and also Japanese. We are kind of people. The ethnic. We have ethnic culture that have an importance. How others perceive you is more important than how you perceive yourself, and how you who you are is more determined by the expectations of others. That's kind of culture we grew up. At least on those who are on my age, on either side of our country, China and Japan, we grew up with the same kind of culture. Today it might be a little different, but I still suspect, our Korean generation, new generation, the younger generation in their teens, the youth, in the elementary school, they are still having that, very unseen pressure from the society, the family, and especially the parents having certain expectation, and then the expectation is expressed and forcefully to their children, which means that they have to be aware of those expectations, whether they like it or not. They did not choose to, but the social and the family expectation is great, very intense. Same thing happens in the church. The problem is in the Christian schools and in the Christian family as well. Regardless of the quality of spirituality, because this is a cultural and social thing. And I told you that still in many of Asian churches, the cultural the influence, the Christian influence does not override against this social and ethnic expectations. So this creates a dilemma in Christian education in a church, whether it's in a church or a family or in a school. It happens. So our job as those evangelicals and those who are in a Bible believing, if you say you're a Bible believing Christian, I don't care what denomination you belong to, but if you are a Christian and you believe you're the one, the kind of believer who's Bible believing, we need to deal with this unnecessary expectation, the cultural, social pressure that is on the kids, even within the church. I told you that our culture expects you to be the best, the first. Church is not necessary, but somehow it comes into the church. And for example, in a Korean church, you want to become a deacon rather than just a plain lay person. And once you have that title of deacon, you want to be promoted to the elders, or we have something, lady elders. And then they think the pastor is higher than or better than the elders. So some elders eventually want to become pastors, which is totally unnecessary. Biblically speaking, pastor is one of a kind of elder. So there are different kind of elders, and pastor is just one of them at the same rank. But in some of the Asian churches, the pastor is expected to be above the elders, giving the orders and authorities, having the authorities and in the higher rank. And then they want to be promoted. So that kind of expectation is not biblical. And if you grow in a church like that, and your upbringing, the Christian education, has that false signal. It sends a false signal to the children and the kids who are growing up. So we need to deal with this. The system is different from A culture to B culture, A nation to B nation, A church to B church. It has all different systems. Some systems are biblical and some systems are not. So we need to examine that system, especially the education system. It has to be biblical, it has to be effective, and it has to be efficient for every and each individual in that particular system. It has to be fair, meaning you deal with everyone with the same respect, giving the same value to every single one of them. If it doesn't happen, your system has issue or issues. Next topic would be the philosophy of education. So philosophy is another key paradigm, the major paradigm that need to be discussed and then understood. So, what is the philosophy of education? Philosophy of education is the idea or ideal that you are projecting toward. And also, it includes how you do it. It's included in the philosophy of education. And then means and tools and strategies, they are also included in the philosophy. So basically it's the whole idea of direction and what to do and how to do about your education. So as a pastor in a church, you need to have the philosophy of ministry. And the philosophy of ministry is much equal to the philosophy of education, because your ministry is basically the education, growing up and helping to mature your students, your colleagues, and your disciples, and your congregation. That's the job of a pastor. And if you're a director in a Christian school, whether it's kindergarten or junior high school, it doesn't matter. And if you're just a teacher for a certain subject in classroom, still the same. There has to be an idea, including the direction you're going, how you're going to do it, and what you want to achieve at the end. So if you don't have those ideas, the philosophy regarding what you're doing, then you're not doing it right. I mean, you can do it very diligently, but doing diligently does not justify or qualify you as a good pastor or good teacher or good parents. You have to do it something diligently, but you have to do it right thing. You have to do the right thing with the diligence. If you are doing some wrong thing with the diligence, it is dangerous. It is dangerous. And I've witnessed many, many so-called leaders in a church, Korean church I'm speaking of, Korean church, who is doing very diligent work, but they are doing everything, not everything, but some key important things wrong. So they are doing wrong things with the diligence, and you can expect the outcome, right? So we don't want to do that. So we want to have the right, proper philosophy working, and right and biblically acceptable means and strategies as we try to educate our students and disciples. So that's about the philosophy, and it starts with the good tool that you can use. I introduced this tool because I've been using this tool for almost all 30 years of my ministry, and it works. It at least works for me. So I introduce this to you, and you can use it if you like. And it has POGS, four letters to include your I mean, this is philosophy and the plan and practice. That's all included. And then it starts with the P, and P it stands for purpose. Purpose. Whatever you do, if you're a good Christian, and if you're a good student and good person, need to have a purpose. Of course, we need, as a Christian, we need to have that ultimate purpose. And that ultimate purpose is same for the education or worship or family or your work, whatever you do. There has to be that ultimate purpose, which is, I believe, is the kingdom of God, the shalom and goodness and holiness. These are the elements that we are aiming at. I mean, this is another subject, so I'm not going to go too deep into this. But you should be able to name the purpose, the ultimate purpose. And within that ultimate purpose, you have a particular purpose for what you're doing as a pastor, as a teacher, as a parent, as a lawyer, as a medical doctor who happen to be a Christian, as a nurse, and whatever the vocation and the job that you're in, you need to have a purpose. But we are talking about as a Christian educator, the teacher and pastor, Christian pastor, Christian teacher. The purpose, you need to state, what am I trying to accomplish at the end for this particular institution and for this particular students that I am dealing with. And then these are it's like common purpose for everyone that are included as student or disciple. So as a pastor, you have to have a purpose for your congregation, your church, that you are responsible for. As a teacher, you need to write out. I mean, it has to be a written sentence, right? So it starts with a to such and such, and so on. So you want to do, to accomplish, to achieve That's the words that you're going to begin with and state the purpose of your assignment, your job, your responsibility as a Christian educator. So you have to think about it and write them down. And try to, revise it so it has to be inclusive for all, not just for yourself or just teachers, but include everyone in that institution. Okay, why don't we stop here for a moment and I'll come back. Let's take a break. Okay, we are back and we'll continue our discussion. So we have talked about the purpose. Okay, let's have an example. So let's say our purpose of the church is to mature everyone into Christ likeness. So our purpose would be to mature everyone, including pastor himself, the elders, deacons, and the other members of the church, young and old, from babies to the oldest of the church, is to mature them toward Christ likeness. So Christ likeness would be the purpose, the whole idea, the philosophy of your Christian education in your church. Then objectives are the sub purpose. To grow spirituality, and you'll say holistic spirituality. There will be one very good, outstanding objective. So let's say to grow holistic spirituality. Number 2, objectives. To build unified fellowship among the members, among the believers. There will be another objective. So by building up the fellowship and then bringing with a whole holistic spirituality, you have the objective for each individual members and also for the congregation. And then under each objective, you'll have different goals. For example, to build unified fellowship, for example, you have that objective. Then you'll say the goals. How do you do it? By having the fellowship among different age groups. Build age group strength or relationship. That might be the goals. So goals are smaller than objectives, and goals compared to the objectives should be able to measure and evaluate. So it has to be evaluated. That means it need to have some specifics. Those specifics are called standards. So the action plan says when and who, where, how, and what, and so on. So it will follow that 5W1H rule. more like into the full narrative form. So we want to, as you read the standard, you know who's doing and when and how and where and how much it's going to cost and what are some other resources that are necessary. Those are like a standard. And with that standard, you go just one step up, and then there are goals that can be translated into evaluation. So you need to, when you have a plan, you need to be able to evaluate those plans, whether you achieved or not. And it could be quantified. So purpose and objectives, that deals, while it deals with the quality kind of statement, from goals to standard, is quantifiers. It quantifies and makes more specific. So general, it moves the ultimate and general to the specifics, and then specifics up toward the purpose, the ultimate. And the purpose is more abstract, while the standards are very detailed. So that's kind of approach that you're going to have as you plan as a teacher. You do this like every a semester for a teacher, and every at least quarterly or by yearly events for a pastor to do this. So you plan the whole year. While the planning whole year, you're going to divide it into each quarters, and going to have standards, more specific plans that are aiming at each quarter by quarter. So you have a complete 1 year plan, least. So that's how you're going to be. And the purpose is usually it doesn't change by year to year, but the objectives may change from 1 year to another, or first 5 year to next 5 year. That depends on. But the goals usually they must change from. And then this POGS thing not only applies to the whole the church or the school as a group, but you can do the same thing for each individual. And each individuals, your students can learn how to do this POGS thing, and then plan ahead. I told you the existence is current and present, and the future is coming. Whether you like it or not, it's going to come. So this is how you deal and be responsible for the future. So planning is the showing that you are a responsible person, not only for the jobs that you are given, but for the time that you are going to be given. So planning is a very key. And this POGS thing is, that itself is a very many class kind of words, but I just want to give an idea and sense that the good Christian education, it requires very detailed, specific planning. Not only the syllabus and curriculum, but this kind of the direction. So that's a very key element in the philosophy of education. These are some of the considerations in the or items or subjects of your philosophy. So ask yourself right now to yourself, if you're a pastor or a Christian teacher, and parents, Christian parents, who are trying to raise your child in a Christ likeness. First thing, understanding whole person. How do I understand a person? That's very simple question, but very difficult to answer. The answer is not going to be that simple, very complex. Because philosophy usually is not that simple. And complex, I mean, it's complex because it takes a deep, mature understanding of a person, especially who you are. Because how you understand yourself is going to be projected to the ones that you are dealing with or relating with. Some people understand person to be very functional in terms of achievement or in terms of efficiency and focusing on the workmanship and the grade and so on. Many even Christian schools today are aiming to be academically excellent. I'm not saying that that's not necessary. You need to be excellent in academic, but not everyone's going to be excellent academically. See, that's the point. And then there's a more important thing than the academic or other functions or other roles and talents, whether it's art, whether it's sports. There's something that's more important in understanding a person, which is the personality, the character, like the goodness that's should be in. And many current the church and then the school system are not designed to accommodate that need or that more important aspect of a person. They focus more on the functions and activities and the outcomes and the grades and so on, which results from the philosophy of the director or who is responsible, the top person who is going to be designing and running the system, whether it's a church or a school. See, the philosophy of the pastor and the philosophy of the pastor and the director of the school largely determines the way the students are going to be educated. If that is the case, then that element is quite critical. Understanding how that person, that leader, that teacher, that pastor understand a person. We need to see the whole person and then which is more important. Is it their personal maturity or the functional maturity? So maturity or grade becomes a very question. It usually is a dilemma when you're, inclined to more to maturity. That seems like you're losing some academic excellency or excellence. If you focus on academic excellence, then you lose maturity aspect. Because it's given church or school, it's limited. They are coming to the church just with a limited time. And you have to prioritize. You have to have a strategy. See, that's why it's key. And then there's something called learning levels. And each one does not have same aptitude. Aptitude means the ability to take the whatever the knowledge or the whatever is given and take it and digest it and make it their own. That's called aptitude. And just like a talents are different, aptitude are different. Some are fast, some are slow. Not only the basic knowledge, but with the spirituality, some grow fast, some grow slow. Some plants grow fast, some plants does not grow that fast. It depends on which kind of plants you are planting, and it depends on the seed itself. It depends on the weather and climate, and then the soil. So there are many factors determining this level of learning. But our job as a pastor and teacher is to be inclusive, being fair to every student. It doesn't mean that you're going to give the same amount of time and the effort to every individual so they can take it as much as they can take it and they are going to be responsible. That's not how it works in a church. In a church, if you're a pastor, you need to give more to the weaker and slower and the less. And then you give little less attention to the one who is more faster, because they're going to learn faster anyway. So that's what I mean by appropriating. So they can grow, toward the maturity of Jesus Christ. So you have to really plan your time and care according to, not to your schedule, your ability, but according to the recipients, the students and the disciples who are taking it. Individually and personally, you need to customize. So that's kind of consideration and philosophy that I have. That might be different from someone else's philosophy. That's okay. They can have theirs, and I can have mine. It is supposed to be different. Cannot be exactly the same. The communication as well. The communication is a very key part. We can talk about it for many hours on this, but the thing is, you need to be not only the efficient communicator, but it has to be effective communication. Effective communication, that means it should bring out the result as you communicate with the person, and you need to be the receptor oriented, meaning that you are more need to be a listener than the director or instructor. Okay. We have these two subjects that we need to deal with as we try to close and complete this lesson on the Christian education, the introduction. There are two things that matters as a teacher. These are now is practical matters that I introduce, as you look at your textbook, there are more of a practical stuff that is listed, and then please use it like a guideline, and you can go further on those topics and do the research yourself. There are many good books that you can read on those particular subjects. Sorry that I'm not able to complete the whole part that is more practical. But no, I thought it's rather more important to focus on the philosophy and the fundamentals on the introduction level than the practical skills and strategies. But here are two things. There are learning styles and teaching styles. Let's start with the learning styles, and if we can finish the teaching styles. But why does this learning styles matter? Rather than teaching styles. Because you have to adopt, this is a very principle, still the philosophy. You have to adopt your teaching style according to the learning styles of your disciples, students, and your child. So that's who teachers and pastors are. You cannot ask or even demand your students to appropriate or to change their learning styles according to your teaching styles. They are not, and they cannot accommodate. They don't have that ability. That's why you're a teacher. As a teacher, you need to exercise different teaching styles according to their learning styles. So learning styles comes before your teaching style. That's what the learning styles are. Learning style means it suggests that each and every student have a certain style of learning. They learn different. See, that's basic assumption. And it's not just an assumption, it's a proven. Everyone learns differently. Because you learned, say, A style, you cannot assume others will learn the same way you do. That never happens. If we have 20 different students in this class, these 20 different students learn very differently. So I'm sorry that, I'm not able to accommodate every and each student, especially when we are doing this kind of video presentation or teaching due to the pandemic situation. It's as one of the key elements that we are missing as we do this kind of teaching. So this is not the best way to teach, but there's no other options available for us today. So we do this, but there's only one teaching style for 20 different learning styles. So each individual have different styles, but these scholars were able to formulate certain kind of types of styles that for the sake of discussion. So we need to personalize, and by personalizing, we enable their learning styles and maximize the teachings and learnings. So thus we bring effectiveness and efficiency. So you need to be effective and efficient in everything that we do. That's biblical. That is how God works with us. He is effective. God is always efficient because He's God. The reason that He is able to do that is because He knows every one of us 100%, fully. So the same principle applies to our Christian education. Because God does that, we do that. So what are some of the learning styles? By approach, some are visual. Visual meaning learn by seeing. They look at something, they learn. They observe things, and then it's easy for them to learn. They look at the pictures and drawings and diagrams, and they learn. So these kind of person, if you're a visual learner, then this video thingy is a good thing. But I'm sorry that we cannot put more diagrams and pictures and these things, because due to the limitation of time. Another kind of learning style is auditory. They have a very keen sense of hearing and listening and audio. As they listen, they can memorize, they can regurgitate, they just copy the sounds. So some have very good ability to learn by listening and hearing. So those are the ones who can listen to the lecture and learn. And some learn by reading, while some learn by writing. So they're good readers and they're good writers. I used to learn, especially when you need to memorize something, I usually write them down, probably a couple or 3 times. And by writing down, it's easy for me to memorize. And then reading, some just read and then it is there. They learn, they understand by reading. Kinestics, that might be the new word for you. It means movement. They learn by doing it. So hand skill, sports, these things, you are not able to learn by listening or seeing or reading, but rather you're going to learn by doing it. For example, swimming is one of those. And then the bicycle riding, yes. But kinetics, it also means that you experiment, like doing the experiment, science, that some learn best when they do those things. So different students has different approaches, and you need to go into some books there are thick books about the learning style and teaching styles. I strongly advise you to read rather than just listening to these items and you're not understanding. I'm just giving a introduction to these subjects. By other factors, some learn better when they are studying alone by himself or herself. Or some learn better when they are assisted or helped by others. So there are ones who need more personalized individual assistance, and then there are some who wants to study by himself. And some learn when it's interpersonal, much better when it's done by face-to-face. And then for those who are in this learning style, sorry, we're not doing it that very interpersonal. This is non-personal actually. And then one-directional. It's not interactory. I speak and that's it. And either you observe, understand, or you don't. You cannot ask questions. You cannot ask me to repeat certain things or explain it further. Sorry, that does not happen. So it's less personal or non-personal. So some learns interpersonal. And some learns by doing it, empirical, and some just learns by getting the information. So that's informational versus empirical. Those who are empirical, they make more mistakes. But that doesn't mean that they are bad or worse. It's just who they are. And especially when it is your child. Some are very empirical. They have to do it. And there's a hot stove, let's say. And you tell them, do not touch it. It's going to be hot. It's going to burn your hands if you touch it. And there is always that child. No matter what you tell them, they go touch it and burn them. And then learn. See, that's the kind of person. Some, by telling it, they kind of process, imagine, and the idea, and then they see someone else is getting burned, and they decide not to do it. That's an informational learner. Which is better? You can say it. I mean, both are good. Some are memory-based learner, and some are understanding-based. Memory-based learner do better in Asian culture and Asian kind of school system. Understanding-based is more like a Western American school system. But some of who has done well in schools in Korea, when they come to America, and then they do not do good. Not just because of a language barriers, but because the teaching style is different. On the other hand, those who hasn't done good in Korean school, I see many who are doing much better in American school. So it depends on which style of learner you are. And then that thing, the left brain and right brain. I say left brain is more rational, logical, and scientific, while the right brain is more of an emotional kind, and then sensitive, and more artistic. So there are two different kind of learners, depending on which brain is more vitalized. So let's go to the teaching styles, trying to conclude. Okay. There are these generic model. And if you just look, Google on this teaching style, most likely you'll find out these. So authority is a lecture style. This is a lecture style. I have to do a lecture style in this, even though I do not like this style pretty much. So teach with authority. It's one directional usually. You lecture and done. And then there's a demonstrator. It's a coach style. He or she does show an example and give the demonstration, and sometimes do with the students. Go experience. And that's a demonstrator. And you show it and do it with the students. And then facilitator is more active style. This is the kind of teacher or pastor I want to be. And you do it, teach it by letting them do and learn by themselves as much as they can. So your job as a teacher is to facilitate and to bring out what's inside. Okay, I think we are done with the time. And thank you for whole semester and the quarter that you're coming to listen. And I hope you learn something important for your teaching and pastoring. And thank you and God bless. And we may see you again in some other subject. Thank you. Bye.